Hi guys, and welcome in. You know, normally we react to Jubilee Middle Ground episodes on the show, and today we have a special one because I'm in it, baby! Let's get into it. All right, sorry about that. We tried to stream earlier and had some technical difficulties where we all sounded like robots, and that's because Scott's in the producer's bay today. It's not because Scott is in the producer's bay. It's not Scott's fault, but Scott is in the producer's bay because Taylor's moved to Nashville, guys. Ooh, I'm not crying, you're crying. He moved to Nashville with his missus, and they've settled down over there, but that does not mean you're not going to see Taylor on the show. He is going to be on the show periodically for the lives, so you guys won't miss him that much. We just have to figure it out from a technical standpoint. So he's in his studio right now in Nashville. We tried to get him on, but our voices turned all robotic. Anyways, let's get into this Middle Ground episode. Y'all know how Middle Ground works. They bring in two people from opposing sides. This episode is trans women versus conservative women, and I'm a part of it. I hope you can tell which team I'm on. If you can't, just keep your mouth shut and don't let me know. And let's get into it. Woo, woo. Hey, intense.
Step forward if you agree. The transgender movement is indoctrinating our youth.
Pause. Of course, I'm going to step forward, and now in real time, you get to watch me step forward.
We are seeing, especially on social media, on TikTok, you're seeing a lot of people in this community really just targeting children, and you're seeing drag shows, even in conservative states like Texas, and even just media, movies, like it seems like everything seems to be targeted at these kids. You have drag story hour for kids, and it's just really, I think, predatory in a way. And I'm not saying every trans person is doing this, but as a whole, there does seem to be a route that they're taking to get to the kids.
When you hear Blue's Clues playing in the next room, and then you hear the gay parade song, it's Blue's Clues, you're not expecting to be talking to the children about that. Yeah. It really makes you wonder, are they really coming for the children?
And I think we see in our population now the rate of young children who are identifying as transgender, non-binary is skyrocketing. And I think there's something to be said for people who are truly experiencing gender dysphoria, which we recognize exists, and those who are experiencing what is now going to be called, or in the future going to be called, this social contagion gender dysphoria, where they're being exposed to it on social media or in school, or mom and dad are having a conversation about it with children, and children are now starting to develop gender confusion.
Or even
It's so weird listening to myself, first of all, and I don't know what to say because I'm like, oh yeah, I just said it.
No, you're killing it. Yeah, this is super smooth.
Thank you. No, I'll tell you a little bit about like the background of this. We met on like a Saturday morning to film this video, and of course everybody's there waiting to go on set and to film, and like half the people are masked up, and they tried to like get people to wear a mask before they go in, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. No, we're gonna sit down, and they're like, don't talk before the episode, and like some of people like just disregarded them and just like kept talking. But for the most part, they kept it pretty clinical in that we were sitting with each other, but weren't allowed to talk to each other before the filming started, just to keep all of our viewpoints out of open discussion before we filmed the episode. So my immediate, I don't want to say strategy going into this, but my temperament was like, I want to be calm. I want to keep things cool. Just talk about it from a logical research perspective. Try not to get catty with anybody. Leave the information out there, and it will speak for itself. So hopefully that's what I did.
Babies, right? People who are being born, they don't have to put the gender on the birth certificate, and they're saying you can choose whatever you want to be. Like, that's so dangerous. And even lying to them, saying like, oh, if we put you on hormone blockers at this age, it won't do anything to your puberty, it won't affect you long term. And it's just a straight up lie. And there's like an entire Reddit thread dedicated to people who've transitioned, talking about how much they hate their life now because they transitioned as a child, and now they amputated off healthy body parts and are miserable.
Yep.
All right, can the disagreeer step forward?
I know y'all recognize one of them.
The fact that the trans movement has got people shook, has me so excited.
I know some of y'all probably have PTSD, like, again? She's there again. Yeah, Blossom, who's on the right in the Black Trans Lives Matter shirt, was, of course, on the show after. Even though there is an abundance of requests for Gina, who's to the left of me, to be on the show. And guess what? Gina will be on the show in the new year. You guys requested it, and so many people in the Jubilee comments wanted to see it. So I reached out, and Gina is going to be on the show in the next year, in the new year, to speak further about some of the things that we discussed and probably just tell her life story, because she's got a wild one. And it's interesting that she was even on this panel, because Gina is trans, but not exactly. Gina was born intersex, so her parents had to choose which sex she was going to be at the time of her birth, and her parents chose male. And then Gina grew up and was like, I'm a female in a male's body. I'm a woman, and transitioned to female.
Interesting. Just for clarification's sake, is that the same as a hermaphrodite?
It's similar, yeah. It's like it's indistinguishable in some sense. So they allowed the parents at the time to go, which sex you want for your baby, and yeah, that's what Gina ended up. So imagine your parents pick boy, and then you're like, I feel like a girl. That's got to be rough.
That would be a tough one.
I'm like, for that, you do whatever you want to do, and I give no comment.
The trans movement is not indoctrinating our youth. Our youth are understanding who they are at a younger age. And from what I was hearing over here is a lot of what y'all were saying, I wonder would you say it to the parents?
Yes.
Because we need to really look at what the parents of trans youth really go through. Trans youth, instead of them enjoying their life, playing with their friends, they're up in legislation trying to fight for basic rights here. 1 in 5 transgender youth have tried to commit suicide. Why are we trying to?
But why though? Is the question. Because we can throw out stats about depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, particularly with trans young people. But is it because of the culture that they live in? Maybe partially. It's certainly not easy to be a trans person in America today. But is it also because gender dysphoria is often coupled with a lot of psychiatric comorbidities and a lot of other psychiatric problems that people, for some reason, are unwilling to acknowledge? That too. So we have to ask ourselves why.
Police them.
But you're bringing it only to the parents. The question was indoctrination in general. Am I correct?
But they are part of that conversation. Someone said something about drag shows coming to schools or whatnot. The kids enjoyed it. The parents just had a problem with it. But that's their issue.
Okay, first of all, kids will enjoy anything if you package it up for them. You could give a baby a carrot dipped in dirt and they'd be like, this is the best day of my life. Kids enjoy what is put in front of them and entertain themselves with what is put in front of them. So would you rather what's put in front of them be a Dr. Seuss book or a drag queen in a thong? Just a question.
It's only someone dressed in drag reading a story.
Is
that could have
drag
been
not
anybody.
blackface for women? I see it as a caricature of womanhood.
But inherently
As
sexual as
insulting.
well.
I have to agree with you guys. I do not like the drag queen social hours. I personally, as a trans person, didn't ever go to a drag show until I was about 40. I'm not for the sexualization of kids. Why are we not letting kids be kids and bringing sex into their lives so early?
I think it's predatory in general to talk about sex with children.
Yeah.
Straight sex, any kind of
I have a
sex.
real problem with Boy Scouts with that.
Who's teaching sex to 3rd grade children? I really want to know.
Have you looked at
Who? It's almost like mandated curriculum right now that you learn about your sexual education. And I think right about at the 3rd grade. So there's several answers as to who. We can run through a whole docket of stories of young kids being exposed to pornographic images in their library books or in their teaching. Parents and students coming home to parents and saying, hey, we talked about gay sex today. Project Veritas just put out a video of a dean from a private school talking about giving the children sex toys at the school to play around with and educate themselves on how they're utilized. And this dean at this school, he says, this is what makes my job really cool. This is what I love about my job.
Yeah, that was a little scary. I feel like Blossom here was kind of playing on semantics. They're not overtly teaching it necessarily in certain schools, though in some states, that's arguable. In certain public districts, that's very arguable. But yeah, it's more of the, as you were talking to, the teachers that bring in certain stories or certain books or certain paraphernalia that just lends toward that teaching or subliminal teaching. You know, that's just as horrible, if not worse.
Yeah, when I went to school, they said, hey guys, just to let you know, Wednesday we're doing sexual education. Here's a paper about what you're going to be learning about. I want you to take this home, show it to mommy and daddy, and if mom and dad don't want you to learn about this stuff, they'll check this little box that says opt out. I don't know why we've fallen away from doing that now and why we can't just put parents at the forefront of these conversations and say, hey parents, here's what we want to teach your child. Are you okay with that? And if not, little Timmy goes and has a pizza party in the other room while the kids learn about gay sex or something like that, which is basically what's happening now. And it sounds so crazy to even say because these are conversations that were unimaginable, even like 5-10 years ago happening in an elementary school, but they are happening. I wish I had pulled up that Project Veritas video, but we don't need to watch that right now. Just trust me, bro. Source, trust me, bro, but also look up Project Veritas if you want to hear it from the horse's mouth.
The California curriculum for sex education, you need to.
I know that when I was in preschool, I got my first crush on a boy because to me at the time, he was in kindergarten, he looked like Prince Eric from
Little Mermaid.
Yeah, Little Mermaid. I don't think like him ever crossed my mind when I was 4, but obviously like it would have been good to know that like it's okay, like if you have these feelings for someone of the same sex.
This story, Roxana's story, I will tell you, all the stories really break my heart to think about them, but Roxana's story really broke my heart because she's talking about herself in the past tense, talking about when she was 4 years old, which means when she was a 4-year-old boy, she had a crush on another boy at school. And by virtue of the position she's in, the family she's in, I don't know, and maybe some sort of cultural sense, was told that's not normal, that's not okay, and look at where that pipeline led to. So you had something that's honestly quite normal for children. I know a lot of people probably won't admit this, but it is normal for children to be like, oh, I think I have a crush on that person. And sometimes that person is of the same sex of that child. And you can approach that as a parental figure or a role model or whoever you are. And you can go, absolutely not, that's disgusting, that's not okay, blah, blah, blah. And then this child goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. I had a feeling that came to me very normal and naturally, and I expressed that, and now I'm being attacked for that not being okay. And you can think it's not okay as a parent, but how do you express that to your child, and what's the healthy way to navigate those feelings with your children? It's certainly not the way that it was handled here, and I can only imagine, and I don't want to speak to Roxana's situation specifically because I don't know what her specific situation is. I did not live her life, but hearing that as a young boy and going, whoa, this is not normal, something is very wrong, I need to do something about this. Can you see how the path to gender dysphoria is pretty clearly like cut open for you by whoever had that reaction? Yeah. Which is why when you're looking at, the writing of Deborah Soh or Abigail Schreier, a lot of these kids who express gender dysphoria and end up going to clinics and transitioning and detransitioning and going through all this turmoil, they get to their adult part of their lives and they go, oh, I just like somebody of the same sex. And they end up marrying somebody of the same sex or something like that. And this is statistically proven and researched. So how we respond to children that express what are normal and natural curiosities is really important as parents. It is so crazy now to look at my life and the life of people around me and think about how much of it can be tracked back to childhood experiences and how one childhood experience can shift the way that your life pans out for you. It's crazy.
When we think of youth in general, they're having sex at a lot younger age, whether we like it or not. Let's just keep it 100% real.
You don't think it's because of that?
I do not think it's because of that. It starts at home with parents teaching their children, because one or two things is going to happen. Either you teach your children or the world is going to teach your kids. That's the reality of it.
They are learning about it at younger ages from some adult or even their peers who learned about it from adults. Mm-hmm. That is, in definition, indoctrination. As a mother and seeing what my children are going to have to be introduced to at such a young age. Like, I didn't even know what a gay person was till I was like 12. And so they're going to be having these really heavy adult conversations at a really young age just because of their exposure. And that is honestly just scary, because I don't want to have those conversations. That's why I will be homeschooling my kids, because I do believe it is my responsibility to protect them and shield them from the outside world, which is targeting children.
And now this is why I so often in these conversations I like sit in the middle of what people are on both sides of things. Like I get what Aaliyah's saying. She's like, I didn't know what gay people were until I was 12. But to move forward with that and then say my job as a parent is to just like shield my kids from what is reality. Like, it is a reality, and it's about how we have the conversation and what is in that conversation. Like, your kid can know that gay people exist without having to know what they do sexually. And they're going to run into it. Like, it is going to be something that's seen. If your kid is out in the real world walking around and seeing people, they're going to see like, oh, those two guys are holding hands. Those two girls are holding hands. Mom, what is that? And it's about having that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, there's something to be said for like teaching your child in like spigot form, right? You can dial it up or dial it back as hard or as open as you possibly can. Depending on their age and their development, psychologically, physically, all those things, to help them develop as a person. Because like you said, this is true. It's the real world, and you will see this, and it's helping them sharpen the tools for later on in life. Well, when they will inevitably come up against this stuff, so that they can discern for themselves as to what's right and wrong.
Exactly. Simple as that.
The trans community and the trans movement is really shaking the course of what people think gender identity is supposed to be.
So in one sentence, you're saying that you guys are not responsible for the indoctrination that's currently happening with
Absolutely
children.
not.
And in the second sentence, you are saying we are shook by the fact that you are responsible for it.
No, you are shook at the fact that the trans movement has become what it is.
What do you mean? Like, and this is just like getting back and forth in an argument. It's interesting that when you argue with people that have established their stance, and this is something we all do. I've done this on several occasions and continue to, but when they've established their stance and they go, this is where I stand and I am not moving no matter what you say, then you have a problem. It's like, who are you debating and what are you debating at that point? And that's how you find out who an ideologue is. And Peter Boghossian, who was a former professor in Portland, really explained this to me as I was watching his videos. He's like, if you want to figure out whether or not you are dealing with somebody who is an ideologue, meaning they are just completely ideologically possessed and they are not going to budge no matter what you say, ask them a simple question. And the question is, look at the subject matter that you're talking about and say, what information would I have to put in front of your face for you to take the opposite stance that you're taking right now? And if that person looks at you and says, there is nothing you could possibly say that's going to make me change my mind on this, you're dealing with an ideologue. There's really no reason to input more of your effort into that conversation, because they don't want to change from where they are, even if truth is enlightened for them and they see it with their own eyes. And that seems to be the case here.
And a movement that influences people all over the world, and particularly children. And we see it in the fact that the number of young people identifying as transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer is skyrocketing, which means that children are being exposed to these ideas. And it's certainly coming from institutions like the media, like Hollywood, like our public institutions and schools. So to say that that is not happening, or to deny that that is the reality, negates the numbers that we're seeing.
What I would say is that the idea that there is a single transgender movement and ideology is disingenuous, and that at its core, being transgender is about separating sex from sex roles and gender roles.
What's interesting to me is that nobody ever said there was a single transgender movement. But we can all acknowledge that there is many movements surrounding transgenderism, gender expression, gender identity, all of these things. It doesn't mean that we have to pin it down on a particular group of people, a particular set of guidelines or tenets, but there certainly is an overall movement that is happening in this country and that people are talking about and falling victim to.
are compulsory.
Do you think that children should be able to transition medically?
No.
I think
No.
it just really depends
Gina said no. Based.
on each individual situation. They should be able to make the best medical decision for them.
I am comfortable sharing bathrooms with the other side.
Honestly?
Gotta have those YouTube ads. With this question, I walked forward for this question, which at the time I just sort of went back and forth in my brain and I was like, you know what? I am gonna walk forward for this question. And here's why. When you look at trans people, like Roxana in this video, Gina in this video, even Blossom to a certain extent, people like Blair White, Nikita Dragon, who's like a big makeup artist, to the outside world and to anybody with a set of eyes, if Nikita Dragon walked past you, you might think, is that a trans person? But overall, you think that's a woman, right? What bathroom do you want somebody like Nikita Dragon going to? I don't know. You could say the men's bathroom, but I'm not sure how well that would go over or what that would look like. And this really opened my eyes during this conversation because Gina will get into that point and we'll watch and respond to it as it happens. But it's an interesting question to pose for yourself.
Yes, I feel comfortable. Safe, that might be a different question, but comfortable, yes, I feel comfortable.
What I think the bathroom issue opens up is an issue of predatory men taking advantage of the opening. That now they could walk into a women's bathroom or a women's locker room, as we've seen happen in instances like here in Los Angeles at We Spa. And they go into a women's space, they expose themselves to the women, and then they say, well, I'm a trans woman and you've opened up this space for me.
But we cannot blame trans people for that. And
Nobody's blaming you.
That's the problem right here. Because again, when you walk into the bathroom, I'm not interested in knowing what you are, what you identify as. I'm trying to use the bathroom and leave out of there.
Sure, but what about the people who aren't?
What people have tried to say is that when trans women go in the bathrooms, they're being predatory, and that is not the case. That is something we do not blame on trans women. Although you were not saying that, when we talk about predatory behavior and when we talk about like the predatory cases, none of them have been trans women. So I just want to make sure, I know she's not strictly doing that, but because she said that, I think it's very important that
None of them have been trans women. Who's to say? Who's to say? Because now we live in an era where I can wake up tomorrow and say I identify as a man and I should expect people to treat me as a man. So if I identify as a man and then go commit a crime, am I a trans person who committed a crime? To the world I am, because I self-identified myself as that. If you look up the case of Hannah Tubbs is a biological male who went into a bathroom at a restaurant, I believe, something like a Denny's or a Wendy's or something like that, and sexually assaulted a little girl, okay? So Hannah Tubbs, who now identifies as a woman, gets arrested for this sexual assault, and Hannah Tubbs goes, I'm a woman, I want to be put in a female facility. Now, whether or not that happens, I'd have to look into the story and let you know. But at that point, when somebody self-identifies as trans, even though all of their biological and physical markers say otherwise, what are we meant to do as a society with that?
Yeah, and I find it interesting. Blossom seems to be saying, like, you can't say these overarching, sweeping statements that are, black and white and binary. Yet she's saying on the other end that none of these events that have been in the news are by trans women. And it's like, well, you're making a binary statement there yourself and not accepting the nuance of your own claim.
Dude, there was so much jumping around in this and it's like hard to keep up with what people are saying, honestly.
I bring that out on the table and discuss that.
We have to have the conversation, and I'll open up the question. We know that if this legislation happens, if we move forward with this move, there are going to be men who take advantage of it. Now, I want to ask you, is your comfort as far as going to the bathroom more important than the female women that will be victimized by this?
Who said female women will be victimized by this?
They will and they have.
No, you're only assuming, but the reality of it is, again, when people are going into the restroom, when people are only going into the restroom, they're only focused on doing one or two things, and that's using the restroom.
Yeah,
But you didn't answer the question. Is your comfort more important than the female people who could be victimized by this?
Okay, so let me help her answer the question. Which one do you think I'm going to get the kicked out of me in?
Great question.
It wasn't the women's restroom. The issue that you're bringing up, first of all, is already violating a whole bunch of laws, okay? If somebody's exposing themselves in a bathroom, that's a whole different environment rather than just letting trans people in. In California, it's right now 100% legal for trans people to go use the bathroom of their choice, so I don't know what law you're talking about.
You're asking this question.
And this is what Gina just said, so valid. And this is something to think about as well. So where do the lines get drawn? Is it like trans passing people can go to the bathroom of their choice? Is it unisex bathrooms, which would be like an overhaul of all bathrooms in the United States of America to make this happen? Is it that trans people who self-ID, which means people who look like men can go into a women's bathroom if they want to go to a women's bathroom? Where is the line drawn in this situation? And honestly, I don't have a distinct answer for you. My initial feeling is that, biology is biology, and you were born in the body you were born in, and sometimes you get tough cards thrown at you, but also I don't want somebody who looks like Nikita Dragun or Blair White or even Gina having to go into a men's bathroom. I don't know what would happen to somebody who looked like that walking into a men's bathroom. If we're just being honest, we got to be real about this stuff. Who is going to get beat up doing that? Probably them. So it's a tough conversation to have, and in it I lean towards, recognizing biological sex, but that is to probably the harm of other people. But whose harm? Who needs defending in this case? And it's something that we're going to continue to toggle with and toil with for seemingly the rest of time if this continues. Yeah.
As if I would not stand up for cis women that were in the restroom, and that's not the case. Nice dodge there. But the reality of it is, one thing I'm noticing is we're reducing a lot of these particular conversations to genitalia, and it's not about genitalia.
But it is about genitalia. It very much is about genitalia, okay? What stops us from being angry about a trans woman who looks like a woman coming into a woman's bathroom? Because we can't tell. And why can't we tell? Because that person has probably gone through the surgeries and all of the treatment that it takes to present as a woman. Whereas if somebody who looks like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walks into my bathroom, I'm going to turn around and say, what the hell are you doing in this bathroom? So it very much is about appearance and, at the end of the day, genitalia. If women are concerned about being assaulted in their bathrooms and in their spaces, what are they being assaulted by? Somebody's genitalia. So it very much is about that.
It's about safety.
Yeah, her concern is the possibility of predation, and that's still a probability. It doesn't matter if trans people are using the restroom or not. Sure. What you're concerned about is that you're possibly that people feel more emboldened to put on women's clothes and go into the bathroom. But they're still violating the law all over the place if that's the purpose that they're going in for.
The thing is, should you make it easier for people to violate the law? Should you embolden people who want to violate the law to violate the law? And I can see being on both sides of that argument, which is why this is a unique discussion with a lot of nuance and a tough one. I wish it was just like one stall unisex bathrooms in every establishment, and you go and guess what? The bathroom's yours. And it doesn't matter who else wants to go to the bathroom because you have one stall and that's your bathroom. But 'tis not the case.
Yeah, so I didn't step forward because, and I know in today's age this is going to sound very radical, and but I don't agree with the whole transgender ideology, and so for me it's encouraging something that is based in what I feel is delusion, and so I don't think that we should be encouraging that by allowing men into women's restrooms.
Another ad. So she's basically making the argument that biological sex is real. And denying that is denying reality. So our bathroom should not deny what is reality. And yeah, of course, that's a valid stance as well.
I think that if that's the case, that to some extent, all gender is delusion. If we're looking at historically anywhere from, midwives after the enclosure of the commons in the 1400s, having their whole trade affected, or Brewsters having their trade affected, and now we don't think of women as, Brewsters, or that creating beer is a womanly thing. These all came from social conditions. These all came, a lot of gender, regardless of biological sex, it didn't naturally flow out of our genitals, and it was we're this is how my genitals are, so this is how my gender is going to be. That didn't happen. That's not life.
And this is why the language movement of gender and sex has become problematic. What she's referring to are just roles that have been traditional to certain sexes, and those roles shift and change, and society shifts and change, and all these things. But we've somehow come to a place where we've created a fork in the road where now sex is here and gender is something that is wholly separate from sex. And I do deny that recent shift in that you are born in the sex that you're born in, which is very much binary and does not change. How you express yourself is always going to change. It's always going to be spectrumed, and it is always going to be, for the most part, a result of the environment that you grow up in. If you grow up in a household where the men are subservient to the women and very kind and compassionate and soft and emotional, and the women are lumberjack axe throwers, then guess what? You're going to take on the path of what you were nurtured in that environment more times than not. But that doesn't speak to people being able to step outside of their biological sex and step into a new one.
A lot of people who are either transgender or who are LGBT in general, all my friends were girls. At first, I just remember there were a lot of things where I would kind of come up against people telling me that that's wrong, that whether it's something I like, something I want to do. It wasn't until kindergarten that someone told me that I'm a boy, and I was like, oh.
Huh? What? Wait, it wasn't until you were in kindergarten that somebody told you you were a boy? See, this just sounds like very much product of environment and product of influence. How is it that nobody had that conversation, or that something like that didn't come up? And why is it that your interests are influencing your direct identity? Because we can all be interested in several different things. There are boys who can be interested in things that girls like and can be very effeminate and can even like other boys. And that happens. But then to come down on that child and maybe not give them a sense of direction in who they are as a person, or at least who they just biologically happen to be, can lead to other problems. And it probably does lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of just a lack of an avenue to go down as far as how you see yourself. And I can only imagine the discomfort one might feel in their body if they didn't learn that until they were 5.
I don't feel comfortable going to any bathroom in this world, in the current society we live in. And to make trans women the whipping girls of that, I think that's disingenuous, but I do think that we need a systemic change to make ourselves safer. I don't really know anyone who doesn't feel a little bit uncomfortable going to the bathroom.
And trans people are not a delusion.
Fine.
Let's make it very clear. We're here. We've been here for ages. We've been here since the beginning of time. We're in your history books. And I think it's very disingenuous to say that a whole identity is a delusion.
I believe that you feel like women. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is an objective truth, and I don't believe in his truth, her truth, their truth, my truth. There is truth, and
Who defined that truth?
And it's already defined. And as a Christian, I believe God is the one who set truth.
But who defined that?
Is the truth.
Can you tell me who?
So the reason the Christian perspective is probably never going to work in an argument like this is that when you're speaking to people who don't subscribe to your religion, saying that it's your religion is probably not helpful to the debate. But I understand it's her personal beliefs. What is she going to say other than that's my personal belief? But a great answer to this is who decides what is truth? That was the question posed out. So let's do a little experiment. Tomorrow we erase everybody's memory on this entire planet. We erase all of our books about scientific law, scientific theory, biology. And in 100 or so years, we'll check back in on human civilization. And guess what? We will have come to the same conclusion. We will have developed our sciences, developed our theories, developed laws that will remain. Gravity and the notion of its existence, its existence might go away if you erased everybody's memory. But gravity doesn't go away when you erase everybody's memories. The acceptance of different sets of chromosomes for men and women might go away if you erase everybody's memory. But the difference in chromosomes does not go away when you erase everybody's memory. So where is that truth derived from? From fact in law that is, quite frankly, easily discoverable in today's time, but took a little while for the humans before us. But if you erase all of that today, it will come back with time.
Who define that?
God.
Living in the Bible Belt with religion taking center stage, it's hard for a lot of trans and non-binary folks like myself to really be able to express who they are. I had to really take on my gender dysphoria in private. I couldn't talk to my mom about it. I couldn't talk to my dad, my siblings, because ultimately, I felt like it wasn't going to lead to anything because there wasn't a lot of education in the cis community like there is in the trans and non-binary community. We're talking about a book that was written by man with his own bias.
Who created chromosomes?
Yeah, I'm personally not religious and I believe in science.
When we talk about chromosomes, it goes back to the conversation we were talking about earlier about being intersex.
But we're not talking about intersex, we're talking about people who were born as a male and they tried to transition. The whole fact that they're trying to transition into a female in the first place shows that they aren't actually that, or else there would be no need to transition, right? So you say, okay, I feel like a woman. What is that? What does that feel like?
Yeah, how does that?
And how do you know?
I'm not saying I feel like a woman. I am a woman.
Oh, come on. How did you get to that conclusion? Because in your mind, you felt like a woman. There's not much more to say there, Scott.
Yeah, I would add to like her talking about the Bible and it being written by a man with a specific, agenda to it. I would have to push back on that and leaving the religious aspect of what the Bible is aside.
Sure.
Even if you look at it from just a empirical standpoint, it literally was written over span of thousands of years, and it's an aggregate story that mankind has put together and pieced together to help build a map for people to move forward in the world in a positive manner. So for her to say it's just like strictly one man that decides it, it was literally mankind.
Some guy sat and etched it. He etch-a-sketched it.
Then why did you transition? Why can't you just present as a man but be a woman?
I transitioned so I could be who I was. I did not feel like I was the person that I identified with when I was born. So I took the steps to align my outside body with how I feel on the inside. What makes you stand up every day and make you identify as a woman? Let me challenge you on that.
I am a woman, and I don't like being called a cis woman because I'm not a cis woman. I'm a woman. Yep. I'm not a birthing person. I'm a mother.
So get mad at the terminology, not at trans people.
It's your new terminology.
But this is what I notice a lot of cis women do. The terminology has been around for so long. Cis is a prefix. Cis means same.
No, it's not been around for so long. It really hasn't.
Instead of getting mad at trans and non-binary people for using updated terminology, get mad at Webster. You're not going along with the times and being educated on the different pronouns and the different identities.
She just said it's been around for a really long time, but also you're not using the updated version.
Yeah, and she's also saying get mad at the pronouns, which they have brought forth and shoved down everyone's throat to utilize and to use in order to affirm them and their existence, which she says has, as you say, have always been around. Yeah. Like, it's kind of circular logic here.
Yep, it's just like jumping around. Now we're going to skip this next question because it doesn't really get into that much of a debate, but here is the next statement. After the spam ad. Oh my gosh. The next statement is that trans women should be able to compete in female sports. And I was actually shocked at the response that they had to this because Blossom, of course, is the only one who walked forward and said, yes, trans women should be able to compete in sports. And it is really contingent upon, again, a denial or at least an outright bending of reality.
Compete in women's sports.
I do think that trans women have every right to compete in women's sports. When trans women are on hormones, the hormones break their body down. Having gender affirming surgery breaks down the body. And so I think we really need to be educated before we jump to a conclusion that trans women are stronger than cis women in sports. Hi, everybody.
I find it interesting that you assume the people who disagree with you are uneducated, and I will speak out against that. I think the research shows that trans women do happen to have a biological advantage against biological women. Even though you are taking hormones, and that does start to change your body and level things out, we're talking about primarily people who have transitioned post-puberty, which means they do have male bone density, male wingspan, male hand size, feet size, lung capacity. All of these things are going against women, biological women, when trans women start to enter their spaces, their sports, and compete against them. And this is really concerning for me.
I think for me, it's not a question of whether or not trans women can compete in sports. It's a question of how can we change the institution of sports in this country to make it equitable and to create more opportunity for cis women.
I get what you're trying to get at, but that is definitely not the question at hand. The question at hand is, should trans women be able to compete in women's sports? And as far as equity, there's no equity needed in sports. Sports kind of sits where it sits because people have made the choice that they've made about what sports they want to watch, how they want to watch them, and how much money those sports they want to give. And that's everybody expressing their personal freedoms when it comes to their entertainment. And just because there happens to be a difference in people watching women's sports versus men's sports does not mean that difference is wrong.
For trans women. And that's kind of why I wanted to actually ask you all, what is your relationship to sports been?
I don't think you have to have a direct relationship to sports to realize that women are being affected by this issue, and I do reject the idea of equity. There is no way to come about an equality of outcome, which is what equity is saying. There's a reason that women's sports are less funded and less watched than men's sports. It's because men seem to excel athletically, and they seem to press the bounds of athleticism way farther than women do.
And it's interesting that the question gets spun into what is your relationship with sports. It's almost like when you see the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers who are out at their different protests, and the pro-choicers are like, how many kids have you adopted? It's well, that is not the question at hand. The question at hand is whether or not either of us thinks that this is right or wrong. So we can get into that debate, but you turning around and saying, well, how much women's sports do you watch has nothing to do with the question at hand.
We now exist on a slippery slope. If it's female sports, is it then female locker rooms? Is it then female prisons, which we're now seeing becoming an issue here in California, where biological male inmates are being put in female facilities because they identify as women? We have to discuss as a society how much we give into the feelings of wanting everybody to be accepted, and how much we are willing to do that at the expense of biological women.
I use myself as an example. This is about how big I was in junior high school and early high school. I used to be able to walk up to a V8 engine block, pick it up off the floor, and set it on a table. And if I was in powerlifting or weightlifting, that amount of, that advantage was just unbelievable. I've been on hormones for 15 years. Did it weaken me? Absolutely. Did my bone density really hasn't changed, my muscular hasn't changed. And this is not a binary question. There's a lot of nuances involved.
Big applause to Gina, by the way, for just being so real about everything. There's how you feel about something, and then there's the truth of what you've gone through and what you've experienced. And you can express what you've gone through and what you've experienced while still having your belief system on that. And it seems to be a general thing with Blossom. Like when Blossom came on the show after Jubilee, I asked Blossom when she was on with not another transgender person, but a transsexual person. I said, Blossom, what were the side effects or some of the long-term ramifications that you deal with having undergone this gender transition? And she said, oh, there's absolutely none. No side effects, no long-term ramifications. I find that really hard to believe. I mean, Blossom's undergone facial feminization, which is facial plastic surgery. A basic side effect of any plastic surgery is just, swelling, bruising, things like that. You can acknowledge that and that be the truth and still say, I'm so glad that I went through the process, though. So yeah, I did have side effect this, side effect that. The hormones did this to my body and changed it in this way, and I had to deal with this. But I'm still happy I made that choice. And when you ask Buck that, because Buck is really aligned in the truth of himself and his existence, he's going, yeah, I dealt with this. I dealt with these hormone changes. I still don't even know what the long-term effects of being on testosterone my entire life are. I had my cervix and my uterus fused together and create a painful infection that led me to be admitted into the hospital because of the testosterone shots that I was on. These are the things that I dealt with, but I'm glad I went through that transition because now I am happy and comfortable in my body. The two things can be true at the same time. So to not be able to acknowledge that, to me, speaks to the fact that you are safeguarding yourself from recognizing what is reality.
I just want to ask a question for what you were saying. Can you throw out some statistics?
I don't think you need to have there's an abundance of research. There's even trans activists who agree with exactly what I'm saying. And your hormones can change, right? And even she just spoke to the fact that her bone density did not change in going on hormones and changing these things. And we can see it in sports as we're watching them. Leah Thomas is a great example.
So if you can't throw out the statistics, we're not doing enough of the work.
Says who? Says who? It's like being like, if I take these AirPods right now and I let go, they will drop. And then somebody goes, you got stats to prove that? What's your source on those dropping out of your hand if you open your palm? And you go, and they go, well, if you don't have stats, you're not doing the work. That's what it's like, guys. That's what it's like. Because we know if I'm like, Scott, do you want to fight like they fight in the UFC? You want to go enter the ring with me on Saturday? And Scott's like, yeah, you know what? I'll do that. And I go, I think Scott's going to beat my ass.
Put him up.
Yeah. They'll be like, what stats do you have to prove that that's the case? I don't know. Maybe because he's a grown man. Anyways.
And let's also be clear, there are some cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone as well. And so we really have to unpack it from all different sides here.
Can you produce statistics about the bone density of biological men and how it changes upon being on hormones and whether or not it levels out to biological women?
I actually cannot, because when I would think of those statistics, I would think it was BS, to be quite honest with you, because the reality of it is we could talk about...
My face, I just went... I don't even know what to say.
It was like she was hanging her hat on statistics being the sole factor for making your argument, and then just said that statistics don't matter in this situation because it's all about experience.
Right, which is, again, a marker of dealing with an ideologue, guys. And it's not something that should be offensive to say, but it's somebody who's thinking, no matter what you tell me, my opinion is not changing. No matter all of the facts that you put in front of my face, the abundance of information we have available to us, my opinion on this will not change. And I say this knowing that I do that with certain things in my life, that there are certain blinders that I have on, that if you try to talk to me about a certain subject, for some reason, my mind does not want to be changed about that subject, and it will stay that way. And we all have ours. We all have a list of them, and it would probably behoove us to find out what that list is before, we kick the bucket. But this is just one of them. That's just one of them.
Yeah, but you have the humility to even acknowledge the fact that you have them, one, in the first place, and two, that ultimately it might be deep down that you just need them to be true.
Right.
But ultimately you're going to come to, face those hopefully in your lifetime. But it's like there is a level of humility that you're showing in that moment, and even expressing that
right.
someone like an ideologue doesn't.
Right. It's very true.
About statistics and the research all day long, but it's about experience. We're going to be looking more at the experience because, again, when we look at cisgender women who produce high levels of testosterone and who have been kicked out of sports and been disqualified from teams based on something that they biologically cannot control, then what are we really talking about here?
Well, we're talking about, data and that is overwhelming, and we're talking about what is also we're capable of seeing with our human eyes. I think it's very clear that if you compare maybe you to the rest of us, there is going to be a strength difference. There's going to be a bone density difference.
But you're just saying that you don't know until we physically do something, and just perceiving and assuming just because I look a certain way, that's not fair. Me, her we could look completely different or whatever, but she may be stronger than me.
I agree, but
she have much more agility and vitality.
I'm like trying to keep my calm.
I
feel like I stayed pretty calm. I tried. I tried. And the comments were actually overwhelmingly super positive on this Jubilee video. And y'all, I really tried. I was like, I'm going to stay calm, cool, collected during this whole thing. And I think I did. And I hopefully I'm remaining calm.
Than I do. We don't know that until you actually do it.
I'm saying it has been studied, it's been done.
And it's been done, we've seen it
but it's an
time
assumption.
and time again.
But we're only going on assumption at this point. Because again,
it's not assumption when we see it. Maybe it's the news cycle that I watch, but I see it a lot. I see it
How charitable of her to say maybe it's the news cycle that I watch.
quite often where they're showing trans women beating. I'm by far.
And you don't see women dominate.
Literally beating, like in fights. You have trans women beating up other women. That's what we're talking about here. So just to be able to look at that, see it, watch it, and then just deny it outright is just unbelievable to me.
In the men's sports, right? You don't see trans men going into men's sport and just completely dominating and wiping the field with them. This is what happens when you,
great point,
in my opinion, twist God's design. And when you go against God's design, you create these problems that you wouldn't have if you weren't going against what God intended.
I'm going to take her side a little bit on that. Let me say one more thing, and I'm supporting you on this one. There's a great deal of women that, and actually there was a lady in the last Olympics that they actually disqualified until she went on androgen blockers to knock her testosterone down to a female level. Like I said, this is not a binary yes or no question. And the whole idea of messing with what, God puts up, God put me up, okay, if you want to take that. And I had this conversation with a very religious man in San Diego, and he was like, oh, I don't quite know how to deal with that.
And God made you that way. But he didn't make a lot of the people transitioning.
I understand.
No, but God also understands my transition. God, first of all, knew what I was going to be in my life. God already knew.
It's almost like, okay, what's the point of having the conversation? Clearly, you guys all have your own separate visions of possible faith. I don't know whether or not they describe themselves as being faithful to any sort of God or beholden to a God, but clearly you guys are gonna not agree on this. Like, that's not gonna go anywhere.
No. And one thing that's interesting here is Gina. She was talking about this isn't a binary thing here. But I feel as though we're missing the point. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, right? Mm-hmm. As you stated in the discussion with Buck and Blossom, there are exceptions, but we as a society, and we saw this throughout the pandemic as well. It seems as though like any small sliver of, let's just call it risk here, we have to deal with, and that's what we have to deem as like the most important thing. And in the same situation here, any sliver of, a random biological anomaly happens to be the common situation for everyone.
Right.
And it's just a strange way of thinking.
Yeah, it's the same way, like when you're talking to transgender people about gender ideology and they go, well, look at intersex people, which is what Gina is an intersex person. They go, well, look at intersex people. They're born not being able to distinguish. So that validates my identity. Whoa, wait a second. A statistical anomaly that happens like so rarely does not justify the radical bounce in ideology that you are taking right now to convince me that men can transition to be females. It does not justify that. So It's like that movie, He's Just Not That Into You. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie with like Jennifer Aniston and all these different A-list celebrities in it. But the girl's like, no, like we've been together for 13 years. He's gonna propose. And he's like, yeah, I had a friend once who was with her boyfriend for 20 years, and then suddenly he got down on one knee and proposed. Yeah, there are exceptions to the rule. But the rule typically is if the guy's with you for 10 plus years and he's not proposing to you, probably doesn't want to propose to you. Of course, Jennifer Aniston gets engaged by the end of the movie, but I'll take the lesson.
Dysphoria is real.
Oh, we gotta plug back in.
Okay.
Technical difficulties all around.
Yeah, so the next statement is gender dysphoria is real, and I walked forward for this one because, yeah, gender dysphoria is legit.
Find the lowest
And an ad.
I can't deal with this, guys. I swear, I'm gonna get ad blockers on this computer. Somebody said I'm a Zoomer and I don't have ad blockers and that I should be ashamed of myself, and I do feel ashamed. Anyways, gender dysphoria is real. Certainly not as big as the numbers we're seeing now. It's like, again, a statistical anomaly to feel dysphoric in your gender, and now we're treating it like it's just an average Tuesday at home.
I think it is obviously real because many people experience it, but like any kind of dysphoria, whether it's someone who thinks they're overweight or anything, I think it should be treated as not reality. Like if I thought I was obese, I wouldn't want to go to a affirming therapist to tell me, yes, you are obese and you should, get skinnier.
Well, I had the opportunity of working on the DSM-4, I think it was, when we actually declassified transgender dysphoria from a mental illness to a condition. I had been, at that point in time, I'd been cross-dressing for 50 years. And, because that dysphoria was there and every single thing I did to try to drive it away didn't work. I spent millions of dollars trying to be the coolest dude in the world. I bought airplanes, I bought everything that I could to just show the world how masculine I was. It didn't work. It didn't go away. And I did therapy. I purposely went to a therapist that was anti-gender affirming. And literally he said, you need to do this, and because it was so deep-seated.
And you are going to have cases like that. Undeniable that you are going to have cases like that. And Gina, of course, we're far more sympathetic to as far as the background of being intersex and having your parents choose your biological sex and then that going awry. Totally unique, very, very unique situation. But yeah, she talks about the declassification of gender dysphoria from illness to condition, which is just fascinating. And I want to read more about that and why they chose to make that decision, because I don't see what's wrong with saying that it is a form of illness. And there are many trans people who agree. I mean, if you're waking up every morning, looking in the mirror, feeling disgusted in yourself, like burning in your body for how you look and how you feel, is that not illness? And maybe it's because we've stigmatized mental illness in some generations, and some view that as an inherently negative thing. But now, like, we're being dishonest about what illness looks like, because I can't think of something that looks more like illness, and mental illness in particular, than waking up looking in the mirror and feeling disgusted with what it is that you see. If I was waking up looking in the mirror and saying, I'm morbidly obese, I need to stop eating, I need to go run around the block 15 times before I drink a glass of water, people would look at me and say, you have a mental illness. And that's something that we can deal with, and it's normal. Like, a lot of people have mental issues and afflictions that they have to deal with, but let's put you down the proper route to treatment. I don't know what's wrong with saying that, why that's transphobic.
Spent 6 weeks as Gina with my son, and at the end of that period of time, he asked two very fundamental questions. The most important one was, it's got to be truly exhausting for you to lead two lives. And I was kind of like, that kind of shook me to the core that my 22-year-old son saw that better than I did. So shortly thereafter, I announced to my family that I was going to transition. My wife and I separated because of it. The kids were not necessarily shocked, but understood and have supported me quite well. And my wife has actually become a very good, very warm, supporting person.
Can you imagine just being anybody in that entire situation? Being him in that situation saying, guys, I really am a woman and I'm going to go down this route of medical transitioning. I tried to go to a doctor who would steer me away from it and keep me in this body that I'm in. And even he's recommending that I transition to be female. Imagine being the wife who's been married to a man for a very long time and that man telling you, I'm a woman. Imagine being the children who grew up with this fatherly figure and watching this person just struggle through life day in and day out and then being told, I'm a woman and I'm going to go through this. Rough position to be in for anybody.
Oh yeah, I can't even imagine what that would be like for any of those members of the family. But one thing I did want to bring up and ask is, like, do you think they're and obviously I feel for these people who truly have this issue and mental block, but do you feel as like a society as a whole, due to the victimhood, idolization of society right now in the culture, do you think there is an incentive for people to kind of lean into their apparent or what they think is a mental disorder, but it just so happens to be part of growing up and learning life and learning how to live through it? Do you think there's just people accepting that and wanting almost to have that mental issue, bring it to life?
Totally, and especially young people. It's like as young people, we are looking for something to struggle with and like contend with. And I mean, the numbers show it too. You've got like young people, particularly girls. So like, why is this affecting girls more than it's affecting guys? If this is something that's totally normal across the board and we're all equal but different and all this different stuff. And why are girls being so heavily affected by it? And why are they being affected at ages where girls typically go through a whole bunch of emotional and hormonal turmoil? It's happening to young girls like right on the precipice of puberty or in the middle of their puberty, where you're already as a young woman feeling so much discomfort with your body. You are like forsaking yourself. You're like, this is horrible. I don't know what's going on. I'm only 13. I'm only 14. I'm only 15. Freaking out in your brain, feeling a whole lot of discomfort. And then you couple that with like, you're feeling uncomfortable. Maybe you're a boy. And then you're going through this normal process of puberty. And then it becomes abnormal because somebody's given you this idea. And then you latch yourself onto the idea. Because there are actual things happening hormonally in your body to justify you thinking that way. And then it just goes down the rabbit hole. It's crazy.
Yeah, and this may be me speaking out of turn due to the fact that I'm not a female, but but isn't there something to be said also for younger females? The way boys and girls at that age kind of figure out the hierarchy, so to speak. Men and boys are just more physical in their nature and how they interact and kind of parse that out. And females, I would tend to guess, are a little more psychological in their attacks to other females as they try and figure out who's in the pecking order and who's at the top and whatnot. And I can only imagine that adds to the difficulty of figuring that out.
Oh, 100%. You're like looking at other girls and being like, oh my gosh, she's more feminine than me, or she's farther along than me, or more guys are interested in her than me, or no guys are interested in me at all. And you're going through puberty and then you're like, oh, maybe I'm just not part of this group. Maybe that's what's happening. I already feel rejected by this group socially. Now I feel it physically and hormonally, and now I have a narrative that somebody's giving me that I could just not be a part of that group, and that could be something that I'm just starting to recognize. So it's just like a recipe for disaster. And it's like no wonder that girls are going through this far more like in a hardcore sense than boys are.
Gender dysphoria almost made me kill myself. And coming from Mississippi, at the time, there wasn't a lot of access to gender-affirming resources, like hormones, if I wanted surgery, whatever the case may be. And a lot of us trans folks who don't have access like that, a lot of us have to do sex work to be able to afford some of these things as well. Me coming up at the age of
Have to is a strong
20, and I knew I had a serious gender dysphoria, I did things to my body that I should have went to a hospital to do. That is something that's very, very hard for people to understand. A lot of us commit suicide because of gender dysphoria, and so it hits our community a lot harder.
I do think gender dysphoria is very much real. I think the issue that's happened, especially in the space of science and research, is that we've looked at gender dysphoria and said the only source of care that we can go through is blind gender affirmation care. And a lot of the research.
Let's look at this. It says receipt of gender-affirming interventions, and this is a fact check they put, specifically PBs and GAHs, was associated with 60% lower odds of moderate to severe depressive symptoms and 73% lower odds of self-harm or suicidal thoughts during the first year of multidisciplinary gender care from the University of Washington. Peer-reviewed study that is already has a counter study to it that is out on the internet that you guys can look into. And when I saw that, when I read the sentence, I was like, I know it was a U.S. study, and of course, it's the University of Washington. Surprise, surprise, because the U.S. has yet to engage in nonpartisan studying of gender dysphoria. It is, like, for the most part, always down a route of blind affirmation, or you have a couple of studies funded by right-wing individuals and corporations and entities that are trying to disprove it. No, like nonpartisan, put the scientists in the field and allow them to come to a conclusion. And when that is done in other countries, guess what conclusion they come to? Not this one. Not that it's lowering your symptoms of depression. Not that it's lowering your odds of self-harm. In fact, that they remain just about the same.
Yeah, and to your point earlier in the show where you were asking, or when Blossom brought up the suicide rate of transgender people, and you were like, no, the question we need to ask is why?
Yep.
Why? It's not because necessarily, or it can't all be because of this apparent discrimination. You know, there is something underneath the surface of all of this that we need to get to, and it's more of a psychological issue than anything, and we need to make these studies happen and make them public.
Yeah, and Blossom just said, what did she say? She said, I wanted to commit suicide, or people want to commit suicide because of gender dysphoria. Not because of how others treat people with gender dysphoria. She said because of gender dysphoria. Might have been a Freudian slip.
Shows that this is not the route to go into. And other countries that have decided to do nonpartisan research, Sweden, Finland, have decided that yes, gender affirmation care should be an option, but it really should be the last resort when it comes to treating people who appear at clinics with gender dysphoria. And, you know, a lot of conservatives will deny and say, well, gender affirmation care does not make them happier. And in many cases, that is true. But there are the cases like
most cases, I should have said.
Yourselves, where the gender affirmation care does make them happier.
You know, I know a lot of people that have transitioned, have untransitioned. I've talked with a gentleman at a religious right convention one day, and he was sitting there screaming how Jesus got him out of his gender transition. And honestly, that was the saddest man I've ever talked to in my life. When I looked at him straight in the eyes and I said, you know, here, I don't agree with what you say, but I 100% support your right to say that. And he just literally broke down crying on the steps of the Supreme Court.
If I could interject really quickly, I do.
No, absolutely not.
I feel as though the medical profession is actually inching towards a space that is going to become unsafe for people who try to express their gender dysphoria, because now we have young children coming into clinics expressing this, who by and large, statistically, about 60 to 70% grow out of that dysphoria. But because it's become a political issue, where many activists have come in and say, no, you blindly affirm, you affirm to the furthest extent that you can, rather than going through a more comprehensive process with these children, we have what I think is a medical tragedy happening against young people in this country.
I have been sexually harassed.
And we don't even need to get into the last question because we are pressed for time. But yeah, this was an interesting experience. And an experience that I'm very glad that I did and went into just open-minded and thought, yeah, of course. I talk about this issue all the time. Why would I not want to talk to people who are directly affected by it? And I think that's how we should approach all of these issues. It's very easy to like sit back here and talk about all these different groups of people and everything that's going on. But when you're faced with the actual people you're talking about, it's important that you step forward and go, yeah, I want to have that conversation and I do want to sit down. And we are going to be sitting down with Gina, who everybody is saying in the chat is super based. So Gina's going to be in studio, hopefully in January, to sit and talk through this a little bit more, because I do want to dive deeper into her story because, like I said, particularly unique, having had your parents pick your sex and then ended up transitioning later on in life. So really fascinating. Glad the discussion was had, and hopefully I'll come back for some more Jubilee Middle Grounds. I don't know what the next one will be.
Yeah, no, I think everybody loves you on these things because you're at least contending with a bunch of the people who are just spouting these leftist ideas, and at least you're putting up a fight for sure. Whereas in a lot of these Jubilee videos, you're kind of getting just the doldrums of the right talking points. But I love how you're digging deeper, and I think so does everybody else.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I went to the comments after this came out, and I was like, oh gosh, I'm scared, because every single Jubilee video where they do like conservatives versus X, it's like the worst comments, people being like dragging the conservatives through the mud. And I went and read it, and it was like, oh, Amala spoke in really good faith. I respected the things that she said, even though I disagree with her. I want to see her and Gina have a conversation. So I was shocked, and I hope that it has something to do with walking into the conversation saying, you know, I want to let them give voice to their experiences and what they think, but I also want to respectfully disagree on the foundations of what they are advocating for or what they may be advocating for. So hopefully that came across, and I think it's given me guidance for how to have future conversations and how to talk on this show in a way that really bridges the gap between left and right on these issues, because it's a hard one to get through. A lot of people hear conservative and immediately have made up their minds. So we're constantly trying to switch that on its head and hopefully shock people with how respectful we are and how we give their opinions in good faith. So that's what we'll continue to do on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching me on Jubilee Middle Ground coming full circle after we've been reacting to the show for so long, and hopefully I'll be on future episodes of Middle Ground. I almost did feminist versus anti-feminist, but I was out of town for work, so maybe next time. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, click the notification bell to be notified every single time we go live. That is Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. We also post every single day of the week because we love to keep the content coming. And drop a congratulations to Taylor, who is now living it up in Nashville in his new home with his wife, who will be on the show periodically. Not his wife, but Taylor. Taylor will be on the show periodically. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic weekend. We'll see you Monday.
Peace.
Bye.